Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some really powerful research that challenges us to, well, fundamentally reframe how we think about mathematics and disability. We're going to explore how to build a classroom environment where every single student not only can thrive, but actually does. So let's start with this. I want you to just take a second and think about something you're good at now. Could be anything. Driving a car, playing an instrument, maybe even just baking a decent loaf of bread. Got it? Okay, now, remember what it was like when you first started? You were probably a little awkward, right? A bit clumsy? Yeah, we've all been there. And that whole journey, from feeling awkward and clumsy to being confident and fluent, that is the process of learning. It's totally universal. And it's the exact same journey every single one of our students is on, especially when they walk into our math classes.
This brings us to a huge, persistent myth in education. And that's the idea of the math brain. You've heard it a million times. Some people just have it, and others, well, they don't. But what does the research actually tell us about how we learn math?
So researcher Arthur Baruti really helps us break this down. On one hand, you've got the old passive storage view. This treated the brain like a filing cabinet, where you just store isolated facts, like 7 plus 6 is 13. In this old view, using your fingers to count was seen as some kind of immature crutch. But then there's the active construction view. This shows us that math knowledge is more like a web. Students are meant to build it, to see the connections, and to really understand the why behind it all.
And here's the absolute key takeaway from that active construction view. Fluency isn't about how fast you can spit back a memorized fact. No. It's the natural result of developing a deep, flexible understanding of how numbers actually work. In other words, it all comes down to building number sense.
And this changes everything for us as teachers. Because it means when a student is struggling, it's not a sign that they have a broken math brain. It's usually a sign that they just haven't had enough time or the right kinds of opportunities to build that foundational number sense. The problem isn't the student, it's often the instruction they've received.
So if we're rethinking how we learn math, it kind of forces us to rethink something even bigger, something more powerful. What we even mean when we say the word disability. For a long, long time, education has been dominated by what's called the medical model. This model basically says the problem is located inside the student. All the focus is on what their deficits are, what their challenges are, and how we can fix them. But then you have the social model, which was actually developed by disabled activists. And this model, it just flips the whole thing on its head. It argues that disability isn't a problem inside a person. It's a mismatch between that person and an inaccessible environment. The problem isn't the person, it's the barriers in the world around them.
There's this fantastic analogy for this, popularized by the author Rick Lavoie. Imagine a person in a wheelchair trying to get into a building that only has stairs. Is the problem the wheelchair? Of course not. The problem is the stairs. So instead of building a separate, kind of stigmatizing ramp off to the side, why not just design the main entrance to be a ramp that everyone can use?
And that idea right there, shoveling the ramp for everyone, is the absolute heart of universal design for learning, or UDL. It's not about trying to patch up a lesson with a dozen different accommodations after the fact. It's about designing our lessons to be flexible and accessible for the widest range of learners right from the get-go. Okay, so what does shoveling the ramp actually look like in a real math classroom? How do we build that one accessible entrance for all our students?
Well, researcher Rachel Lambert gives us a really helpful way to think about this. Forget the old arguments about explicit versus inquiry-based instruction. Instead, think about two different goals we have for our students: efficiency and innovation. Efficiency is kind of like soccer practice. You're running drills, you're mastering known moves. But innovation? Well, that's the game itself. That's where you have to adapt all those skills to solve brand new, unpredictable problems on the field.
And her point is that our students need a well-rounded mathematical diet. They need both. A classroom that only focuses on procedure drills, that's like a soccer team that only ever practice. They never get to play the game. They miss out on all the joy, the strategy, and the chance to really think like mathematicians.
So if we're going to build this well-rounded diet, it helps to know a little bit about how our brains are actually wired for this stuff. How do we process mathematical information? There's something called the triple code model, which Dr. Kathy Beals highlights, and it's a super powerful framework. It shows that our brains learn math along 3 connected pathways. There's the language we use to talk about it, 3 groups of 5. There are the visuals we use to see it, pictures, diagrams, models. And then there are the abstract symbols we write, like 3 times 5 equals 15. The best, most accessible instruction intentionally builds bridges between all 3 of these pathways.
All right, so we've got these big ideas. Number sense, the social model, the triple code. That's great, but how do we actually do this? How do we bring this into our classrooms tomorrow?
Shoveling the ramp is really about providing a rich toolbox of supports and scaffolds that are available to all students, not just some of them. It's about giving kids multiple ways to get to the same learning goal. This could be anything from simplifying the numbers in a problem, to using cue cards, to analyzing errors, or offering a real choice in how they solve a problem. Let's look at a really concrete example. Say the task is to find the area of a rectangle with some messy decimals. Now, instead of pulling a student out of the lesson because they struggle with decimals, we just make the tasks accessible. We say, hey, before we do that, let's first find the area of an 8 by 32 rectangle. See? This lets them get their hands on the core concept, the idea of area, and build some confidence before we add that next layer of complexity. And even simple tools like cue cards that are just available to everyone, that's a perfect example of shoveling the ramp. A card like this one for fractions, it makes an explicit link between the abstract symbols and the language that gives them meaning. It's directly supporting that triple code model we just talked about. And really, sometimes the students just say it best. This quote says it all, doesn't it? At the end of the day, these strategies are about giving students agency. When we offer choice, when we value different ways of thinking, we're empowering them. We're showing them that their way of seeing the math is not just okay, it's valid. But here's the thing. None of these strategies, not a single one, will work without a fundamental shift in our own beliefs. This quote from the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics just gets right to the heart of it. We have to truly, genuinely believe that all our students are capable of doing rigorous, interesting math. And that brings us to the most important tool we have. Seriously, more than any worksheet, more than any strategy, the single most powerful thing we can give our students is our trust. When we trust their thinking, when we trust their ability to reason and make sense of things, we create the space they need to start trusting themselves.
So this journey, then, it's about so much more than just a set of new teaching techniques. It's a really profound shift in mindset. It's a shift from trying to fix students to redesigning the environment, from demanding rote facts to cultivating deep number sense. And ultimately, it's a shift from seeing deficits to trusting thinkers. And making that shift, that has the power to transform everything.